Okay, so this is a guide for students who are doing the assignment titled WAD, or Writing in Academic Disciplines. My name is William Fitzpatrick. I'm a professor with the English program here at UNIST, and I've been helping students complete this assignment for about 6 years. So this is a kind of overview of all the common mistakes that we see whenever students are trying to write this very important paper. I think it's a very worthwhile paper, and I hope students get the most out of it. And this lesson is going to give you a roadmap for how to complete it and how to avoid some of the common mistakes that we see time and again. And we've basically broken it up into 4 parts. So in this presentation, I'm going to show you how to understand the assignment so that you know what we're really trying to do with it here, how to develop your own ideas, and then we're going to talk about organizing those ideas into paragraphs, and finally, how to position your ideas by writing a strong introduction which shows the reader why your writing is important. Sound good? So let's get started. Now, the first thing we have to do when we begin this assignment is to understand the assignment. We need to know, what are we doing here? What's the point? Because if we don't understand the purpose of the assignment, then it's very easy to get lost and get off track and do work which feels like work, but it's not really helping you in what this assignment is trying to achieve. Now, this assignment is not, of course, trying to make you busy. It's not trying to, there's a purpose to this assignment. And really, the purpose of this assignment is to draw your attention to some of the unique features of writing in your discipline. Essentially, this assignment is trying to fix a problem that people have when they come to university. They think that academic writing is just one thing. So students might say, well, academic writing is formal and they use a lot of technical language and you're not allowed to say I. Well, that's wrong. If you actually look at writing in various disciplines, you might find exceptions to all of those rules because they're not really rules. To make this point, let's actually step away from academic writing for just a moment and think about language in general. Okay, how do we use language? Well, as you know, you use different kinds of language for different groups of people, right? You might be speaking one language, such as English or Korean. Nevertheless, you'll use different forms and different styles of language in different situations with different people. And the same thing is true in academic disciplines. Okay, there is this big place called academia, or really university, or networks of universities, and they speak to each other differently, of course, than we talk to our friends or that we speak to a barista. Okay, they use different kinds of language. But when you really zoom in on these groups, you'll find that these various groups inside academia, they all have different purposes. They're working on different problems. They all have different background information. And so they use each of these groups, whether it's in chemistry or electrical chemical engineering or physics or math, computer science, they're all in academia, but they're working on different problems. They have different knowledge, different shared knowledge, and they have different codes. Just like you and your friends use a certain kind of language which outsiders might not really understand so well. Well, similarly, these various groups are not speaking one language. There's not one academic writing. There are various groups and they're all using different languages with each other, different kinds of language with each other, because they're all different groups. They all have their own identity and their own problems. And so that's what this assignment is really trying to get you to see. We're trying to get away from this list of rules about academic writing, which actually doesn't exist in the first place. Like, there is no list of rules that says we have to be formal or that we have to, it don't exist. So really what we're trying to do is take 2 papers from your field and look at them and think, what's going on here? What kind of language are these people using to talk to each other? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that, but the thing that we really need to understand is that this task is not just asking you to summarize this information. This is one of the most common mistakes that we see. I'll get a paper and there's just a list of different features from these articles. Okay, you might a student might say in one paragraph they might say, well, they use formal language and they use technical language and they don't say the word I, and like it's just a summary of all the pieces that are in this article, but there's no thinking applied to it. There's no reasoning applied to it. It's just like a listicle, top 10 things I noticed in this article. So this assignment is not asking you to write a summary. That's an important thing to understand. In fact, that's true in all your university writing. Unless you see an assignment such as the one on the screen here, which uses the word summarize. Okay, summarize is one kind of writing task. And if you see that writing task, then all your professor wants to do is summarize the points. You don't need to do original thinking. You just need to prove that you read something, basically, and to give a list of the various ideas that you found in that reading or what have you. That's not this writing task. Okay, you are not here to summarize the contents of these two articles which you read. Instead, you are here to analyze them. So I haven't seen the exact writing prompt for this, but I assume it's going to use some of these key action words, such as illustrate, analyze, compare, and contrast. All of these are very different tasks from summary. So generally, this assignment is asking you to analyze two papers from your academic discipline and discuss the language features that are in them. Okay, that's very different than summary. This is analysis that we're talking about here. And so your thesis, your idea in this paper cannot be, a very common thing I'll see in the introduction is a thesis statement which says something like, I will discuss the language in these papers. Okay, no, like you need to find your own ideas. You need to pull out from that your original thinking. So you need to go beyond this summary and add your own thinking to it in order to make it valuable. So that's the thing that we're doing here. We're not just summarizing. Summary is on the left, turning these 2 or 3 articles into one article. That's not the point. Instead, we are here to analyze, to look very closely and try to pull out some key ideas that you notice. This is what makes your writing valuable. It's what do you notice? You're going to notice things that are different than other people might notice. And because of your unique knowledge and your unique experiences, you are going to add your own expertise. You have expertise, and you're going to be bringing that to analyzing these articles. So an example of the difference between a summary and an analysis can be found here with this picture of a watch. A summary of the watch might just be, listing all of its parts. A summary would be, well, this is the hour hand, and that's the wristband, and here, this thing is the date. Okay, you're just giving a list of the various features that are there. That's a summary. Okay. Now, on the other hand, an analysis is going to go inside the watch. It's going to try to understand, how does this watch work? How do all the pieces work together? Why is this piece there? Why is it different than that piece? Okay, and in doing that, you are adding value to it. There's no value. It's just it's just information. But here, when you analyze something, you apply your own thinking to it. You say, how do all of these pieces work together? Okay. Now, in writing, in this article, the analysis is going to take the shape of an argument. So this structure we see right here is called an argument, and I'll be introducing this to you a little bit later. But that is what we mean whenever we say not a summary, but an analysis. To write an analysis is to write an argument. And at the end of an analysis, we move from the evidence, which is the list of features that you notice in these articles, we move from that evidence to a claim. Now, a claim I'm going to be talking a lot about in this presentation, but it's something like a point, an idea. It's the answer to the question, so what? What's your point? Okay, so the big point here is that we need to move beyond evidence, which is just the summary, to an analysis, which is finding your own points. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So you can imagine here we have 2 papers. I've chosen 2 papers from my field, perhaps from the field of chemistry or whatever your major is. I found my 2 papers. Now, one mistake that a lot of students will make is that their whole paper focuses on comparing and contrasting only these 2 articles. Okay, but again, go back to the purpose of this assignment. The purpose is not to show how these 2 are similar and how these 2 are different. The point of this assignment is to draw your attention to the unique ways that people in your field talk to each other. And you can never find what's unique about that if you only look at these 2 papers in a vacuum. So it's very important to look at these 2 papers as examples of the kind of language that is used in your field, but to compare them with other academic disciplines, other genres. Now, this doesn't mean you need to analyze 5 more papers, but you just need to keep your focus on the unique features of these papers, which are different than those. So you can imagine, for example, if I was analyzing these 2 articles from chemistry, I would imagine that in chemistry papers, they would be using the phrase H2O. Okay, now if I were to look at a paper from the discipline of physics, for example, they might have an experiment which featured some water, and they would use the word water. They would not use the word H2O. So that is an important thing to notice. That's an important kind of insider language feature. But it's not just about vocabulary. There are all kinds of amazing differences that you can notice whenever you analyze these papers. And so the tool which I recommend you to use whenever you are analyzing these documents is called the rhetorical planning wheel. Now I'm going to introduce all the various parts of this to you, but in general, it's good to know that this tool helps us analyze any text. You can use it to analyze any text in the world. At the center of this rhetorical planning wheel, you see the word genre and actions. Now, a genre is, well, you know it well from movies and music, of course, but a genre is any use of language for a particular purpose. So the great example, here's the way that I like to teach genre. Again, we're getting a little bit away from academic writing here, but this might be helpful. So if you go into a coffee shop, you have a purpose, and we're going to use language to achieve that purpose. You want to order a coffee. So we enter into a genre with the barista. We know exactly what's going to happen in that genre. The barista is going to say, "Hi, welcome to Starbucks. Can I take your order?" You're going to say, "Ice Americano," because you're Korean. So that's exactly what you're going to order. Ice Americano. She's going to say, "What? Tall size?" Or, "What size do you want?" You're going to say, "Yeah, tall size." She's going to say, right? "For here or to go." We all know exactly how this goes. So the genre of ordering a coffee is a language. It's a series of steps that we move through using language in order to achieve a purpose. That's what a genre is. Now, of course, that genre, this is important for academic writing, that genre is going to change. It's like a dance. It's going to change in certain ways depending on the coffee shop that you go to. For example, Starbucks, they use their own sizes. Tall is large size is grande, I think, and tall size is medium or something like that. If you go to Edia Coffee, the dance, the genre, is basically the same, but there are going to be slight changes. And that, like every good dance, that's the way dancing goes. There are general moves that we go through, but of course, small changes that each dancer can make depending on the song and the person that they're dancing with and the audience. And that's exactly the same here. So as a genre, for example, you could consider a scientific report. And we all know what that genre looks like. There's going to be an introduction, a method, results, and discussion. And that genre is basically the same across all scientific disciplines. But there are going to be slight changes depending on the field that we're looking at. For example, in the field of, a hard science like physics or chemistry, there are going to be experiments. And let's see. Whereas if you look at computer science, for example, they're not really going to be running an experiment in a laboratory. They are going to be executing some kind of computer function. So their results section, it will be there, or the methods section, it will be there, but they're going to be describing a completely different kind of method. In the discussion section, for example, that's where we discuss the results and we interpret the results. Well, we're going to be interpreting different kinds of data depending on the field that we're in. So even though the genre stays the same, what's really interesting in this assignment is the way that that genre changes in your academic discipline. So that's what we want to focus on. And this tool, the rhetorical planning wheel, can help you find those features, the unique features about your the articles that you're analyzing. So let me introduce these to you by showing you these 3 articles. You don't need to read them. Well, if you want, you can pause here and read them. It's not a bad idea. But generally, what I'll tell you is that these are 3 articles, or excerpts from 3 articles. They're all about the same subject, which is about a study which was measuring the impact of sleep on student performance. It turns out that students need sleep in high school when they never let you sleep. Here in South Korea, that was very much against your interests and their interests. Sleep has a huge impact on learning outcomes. And so, I often receive emails from students at 4 a.m. and I think, oh God, what are you doing? Like, go to sleep. Okay. So anyway, the subject of these 3 articles is, they're all the same. They're all about the same scientific study, which was about the impact of sleep on student learning outcomes, but they're from 3 different genres. The top left is a research report, scientific research report. The top right is from a popular magazine, and the bottom is from an opinion piece, which you find in a newspaper. So let's use the rhetorical planning wheel to analyze these 3 texts to see how they're the same and how they're different. So one thing we could look at is the audience. Who are they writing to? And we notice that the research report is using this technical language, chronotype, right? Now, chronotype. And it's also interesting to notice how this timing of daily activity, or chronotype. So they give the technical language, but the more prominent position is the timing of daily activity. Now that's interesting. This section is from an abstract. Now an abstract, what's the purpose of this? The purpose is to help the reader determine whether they want to read this study. And so it's going to be written to a wider audience. They're not only writing to specialists who study sleep. They're writing to all the scientific community. And so the first thing they give you is the kind of more common definition, which is this timing of daily activity. And then in a smaller way, they introduce the technical language, chronotype. Now, if we look over here at the popular magazine, we also see chronotype mentioned, but they don't use that technical language because they don't expect the readers of a popular magazine to know or care what a chronotype is. So they describe that by saying biological rhythm. And at the bottom, which is the opinion piece, they don't, let's see. Oh, they don't mention chronotype because the purpose of this piece is not to analyze the data from the scientific report. if you pause and read it, you'll find that the purpose of the opinion piece is to make an argument that schools should start later in the day. So it doesn't really matter about chronotype. So they don't go into that. Their purpose is completely different. And so these language features tell us the audience and the purpose that these articles are written for. So moving on, we see the actions that are taken. So up top, we see in the scientific report, the authors are explaining the study and interpreting it. In the popular magazine, they are giving specific instructions. They're saying, parents, you should model and encourage habits that promote good sleep. And school officials, you should learn more about research connecting sleep and school start times, right? And then in the op-ed, we see should, right? The district should continue to track high school data, sleep data, right? So these texts, they all have different actions. They're doing different things. And just like, remember, just like the Starbucks example, a genre is a series of steps. In the Starbucks genre, there's an initiation, right? The barista starts the conversation. You respond by giving an order. There are these steps that we move through. Similarly here, there are different steps depending on the genre. We also look at the language. In the first case, we see we show. Okay, that's because this was written by the scientists who conducted the experiment. Whereas in the second case, we don't see we, I, me, my, because it doesn't really matter who the writer is. This is coming from a popular magazine. So we don't see those personal pronouns. Now notice, this is exactly the opposite of what you would expect whenever people give you these lists of rules for academic writing. They always say, well, in academic writing, you can't say I, me, my, we, our, but we find exactly the opposite here. Why? Because those rules don't exist, and different groups talk to each other in different ways. So in this case, the researchers are able to say, we show this. Whereas in the popular magazine, the writer isn't really so important. So the writer is kind of invisible. And similarly, in the op-ed, in the opinion piece, the focus in the subject position is the results. So whenever you're analyzing the language, you can ask yourself, what verbs are they using? What verb tenses are they using? Where's the subject? How present is the author? Right. Evidence is another important thing to consider. Of course, the evidence that is being brought into the scientific article, they talk about their own results, whereas in the opinion piece, the evidence which is used, they cite another journal, and that is supposed to give some credibility, some authority to their argument. Whereas in the popular magazine, there is no evidence. They're just kind of talking about general trends. It's almost like a Wikipedia article or something like that. It's just a general educational thing, but this article is not expecting an argument. They're not expecting people to disagree or write a letter to the editor, and so they're not citing evidence. So another good thing to notice is what evidence is being used, how are they using the evidence, and why is that evidence there? You can also look at patterns of organization. So in the scientific abstract, we have a general introduction and then the results saying, here's what we show and here's why it's important. In the popular magazine, we have 2 paragraphs giving some general trends without getting too specific into anything. And then an action, a call to action item. Here's what parents can do. Here's what school officials can do. And then here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. So what do we see here? The results. Here's the main result. Here's a quote from the researchers. Here's what the Seattle School District is doing, and here's what other people think, and here's what I think. That's the way that one is organized. 2 more points here. So we can also look at the context. You can think about what happened before this text was written. What caused this text to be written? Right? In Starbucks, the text emerges because the customer wants a coffee. Well, similarly here, something happened before each of these articles that caused them to be written. And also, the writer probably expects something to happen after. As I noted, we don't see the use of evidence in this one because the writer is not expecting people to fight with them. We don't really write letters to popular magazines. But here, in a newspaper, this person is making an argument, and so they are expecting people to disagree with them, and so therefore they cite evidence. Okay, so you can think about what happened before this text was written that caused it to be written, and what does the writer think will happen next. You don't have to guess when you're doing this. You can look very closely at the text that you're analyzing, and you'll see clues. And then finally, you can look at the writer's role. What is the writer's relationship to the topic, the subject that they're writing about, and to the audience? Okay, now in the case of a research report, we know that scientists are always very careful whenever they're making claims. They don't want to come off too strong because they want everybody in the scientific community to like them. And if they come off too strong and say, oh, my data is the best and these other researchers are wrong, well, then people are going to attack them and they won't get tenure and all these bad things will happen. So academics are often very careful in the way that they write about their claims. We see the authors here saying, it is highly likely that increased sleep was the cause for sleepiness. Look over here. In the popular magazine, they say the main reason, the school start times are the main reason why students wake up when they do. Right? Whereas over here, the authors are a lot less confident. They're saying, oh, it seems possible that, it is certainly reasonable to think that, it is hard to attribute causality. That means it's hard for us to say that this causes that. Okay, they're very careful in the way that they measure it. Whereas over here, we have a value judgment. The writer is saying the Seattle district is moving in the right direction. Right? We don't see value judgments up here. So that's the writer's relationship to the topic, and we see the writer's relationship to the audience. We can usually see that with they're called modal verbs. So could, would, should, seems likely that, seems probable that, possibly, certainly. Those words, which are called hedges and boosters, they can give us strong clues about the writer's relationship to the topic and to the audience. Okay, now I know that was a lot, but of course you can review this whenever you're going through. But the reason that we've gone through that in such depth is because this is the first step of your assignment. You've got your 2 articles in front of you, and the most important thing for you to do is to begin with the evidence. This is your evidence. This is the work that you do here becomes your evidence over here. And the biggest mistake that students face whenever they write this assignment is that they begin with a claim and then they kind of find some evidence to support it. So for example, they begin with a claim. They say academic writing should be formal, or you should not say I in academic writing. And so then they go and they kind of look quickly through their article and they say, oh, see, the authors don't say the word I, right? Like they're working their way back. And the thing is, like that kind of writing isn't worth anything. And we know, like in science, we know that that's bad science. You do not begin with an idea and then design an experiment to prove that idea correct. You need to begin with evidence, and then through a series of careful steps, you make a claim. So the first step in completing this assignment is to use this tool or something like this, to gather evidence about your 2 articles in your field. Once you've gathered that evidence, you're ready to move on to the next step, to turn that evidence into an argument. So let me show you the various parts of this argument structure. So the first part, as we said, is evidence. And this is the stuff. It's not an extra thing. It is the raw material of your ideas. You must begin here. If you start writing your ideas without having gathered evidence, then there's no way to fix it by improving the grammar or improving the organization. The paper is worth nothing. You must begin with your evidence. Because the fact is that you can find evidence to support any idea. And that's what a lot of people do. They start with their claim, and then they go looking for evidence to support that idea. And you can find evidence to support any idea. There are people these days who honestly believe that the earth is flat. And if you want to believe that the earth is flat, you can find evidence to support it. You walk out to the beach, you look at the ocean, you say, oh, look, it looks pretty flat to me, right? You find all the evidence in the world that you want to support it. You can go onto Google and type in evidence that the earth is flat, and you'll find it. It's out there, okay? So this is bad thinking, and it's bad writing. If your paper is going to be valuable, if it's going to be worth anything to you and to your reader, then you have to begin by gathering the evidence. Once you have your evidence, you can then start to develop reasoning. Reasoning is explaining the evidence. Okay, so let's say, for example, you analyze these two articles and you notice that in the introduction section in both of the articles, you see personal pronouns like I, we, my, that kind of thing. But you notice in the methods section and in the discussion section, there are no personal pronouns. So don't take my idea, but let's say you noticed that in your analysis. Well, now you need to start reasoning. Why is that interesting? Why is that important? Who cares? Why should the reader care? What does that tell us about academic writing? And you can come up with different reasons. This is where your thinking comes through. So the basic way to develop the reasoning section is to answer the question, who cares about this evidence? Why should the reader care about this evidence? Why is it important? And how does it help us answer the question? Now, there's a slight difference between reasoning and backing here, which I'll just explain. A backing is essentially the axiom. It's the universal principle supporting your reasoning. So let's say, for example, you were looking at a crime scene. There was somebody who's been shot with a gun. Okay, so evidence, there's a gun. And evidence, there are fingerprints on the gun. And evidence, they're my fingerprints, or somebody else, they're his fingerprints, somebody else. Okay, so that's the evidence. Reasoning is, well, if his fingerprints match those fingerprints on the gun, then he must have been holding the gun. It must have been him who was holding the gun. In this case, backing would be the axiom, the kind of universal understanding that all humans have unique sets of fingerprints. Okay, so there's just a slight difference there. It's the reasoning is about this particular situation, and the backing or the axiom is the universal principle underneath your reasoning. So it's good to think about what both of those are if you want to have a strong argument. Now, finally, once you have gone through, you've analyzed the evidence, you've applied your reasoning to it, you now come to a claim. And a claim is the answer to the question, so what? What's your point? Okay, so if you have found evidence which says in the introduction, there was the personal pronoun, and in the methods, there was not personal pronouns, your reasoning might be, well, in the introduction, the purpose of the introduction is to get the reader interested in the research. Okay, that's your reasoning. And so then your claim might be something like personal pronouns help get the reader interested in the research. It could be something like, I should have prepared this. You could say something like, readers find it an interesting claim in this case would be readers find it's easier for readers to connect with the research if there is a person present, right? It's hard to connect with the research if we're just talking about it in these abstract material terms. So sometimes it's a good idea to use I whenever you are trying to get the reader interested in your research. That might, now don't take my idea now, but that would be one example of a way that you could move from a claim, from evidence through reasoning to a claim. Now, to strengthen that claim, you need qualifiers. A qualifier is a word, it expresses your level of confidence. So are you 100% certain that the word I makes readers more interested in the subject? Maybe, but if you are overly confident, then people can break your argument apart. So you want to accurately express how confident you are in the truth of the claim using qualifiers such as could be, it seems possible that, most likely, probably. Okay, again, these are called hedges and boosters. So make sure you qualify your claim using hedges and boosters. And then finally, you also want to think about what the other people, right? If your claim is worth anything, if it's a good claim, it means that somebody else could disagree with it, right? If nobody else can disagree with your claim, you don't have a claim. Okay, that's an important thing to understand. If your claim is water is wet, you do not need an argument to support that idea. It doesn't require evidence. It doesn't require reasoning. The world does not need an essay about why water is wet. So therefore, if your claim is good, it means that there's somebody else out there who could disagree with it. So to strengthen your claim, you should think a little bit about what would that person probably say. Think about what they would say and then respond to them. You would say something like, so although many people say that it is improper to use personal pronouns in academic writing, what those people fail to understand is that personal pronouns are a good tool for writers to use whenever they want to establish a relationship with the reader, something like that. And so we have now moved from your analysis to hopefully 2 or 3 claims. You want to develop 2 or 3 of these, which are basically your points, your main ideas. And once you have that, you now have the stuff of 3 paragraphs. A paragraph, the definition of a paragraph is the unit of one idea. So once you have developed your ideas using this argument structure, you can now start to organize those ideas into paragraphs. Again, a common mistake is that students don't think about the way that they're organizing the information in their paragraphs. So they might begin with evidence and then reasoning, and then they'll bury their idea somewhere in the middle. Okay, so here is a basic structure that you can use to develop your arguments into paragraphs. So, of course, working here at UNIST, I work with a lot of scientists and engineers. Scientists and engineers love graphs. So let's talk about paragraphs using a graph. Now, you can picture your paragraph on the XY axis, where the x-axis is a measure of time, and the y-axis is a measure of detail. How specific is the information? And so at the top, we have general, kind of abstract information. And then down at the bottom, we have highly specific information, basically evidence. Raw evidence. It would be like a quote from your article that you're reading, or it could be data. It's like raw evidence. And so if you have your chart organized like this, then the perfect paragraph is going to be one that follows this general structure. It's not a hard rule. It's not like you need one sentence here, one sentence here, one. It's not like that. This is like a fractal pattern. It's a general shape that your paragraph should ideally follow. So what does this mean? Well, level four is not level 5. So it is general, but it's a little bit specific. It's not, for example, a very general topic sentence, to begin the paragraph. A very general statement would be, there are some differences in the way that people in chemistry write about elements like water, right? There are some differences. It's like, that's so general, it basically means nothing. Like, there are differences between everything. So what is the point of that sentence? That's not good. We want to be more specific than that. We would want to say, there are chemists write about, they have a specific code that they use whenever they write about elements such as water. Interesting. Okay, that is something that somebody else could disagree with, right? That's a claim that we can test whether it's true or false. The statement that there are some differences, that cannot be true or false. It's just like automatically true. It doesn't need evidence. So here we have something that could be true or false. We can argue about it. So now we want to start explaining that idea by going into the details, going into the reasoning about it. And so in your particular case, if you're writing about chemistry and H2O versus water, you might say, of course, chemists are quite familiar with the periodic table, and they know the elements quite well. Unlike people in other disciplines who don't deal with the elements so much in their scientific investigations. Okay, so level 3 might in fact be a few sentences, but ideally you're moving from general to more and more specific. When you get to level 2, it's before level 1. So you are preparing the reader for evidence. You're preparing the reader for highly specific information. So you would say something like, we can see this difference in particular when we look at the way that these articles talk about water. Okay? And then you give the unfiltered raw data. You give a quote. You say, look, here's a quote, H2O. Here's another quote, H2O. Okay, so you give them the evidence, but you have now prepared them for it. They know why it's important because you gave, all of this was giving context, a frame around the evidence. But then you don't just drop it. You don't just say, here's some evidence and walk away. Now we need to come back up and we need to explain that evidence and connect the evidence to the larger point that we were making. It's kind of like at the beginning of the paragraph, we're saying, hey, if you read this paragraph, I'm going to show you this interesting point that you didn't know before. And so then we go down and we kind of explain this point, and then we give an example of this point, hardcore evidence. And now we're coming back up, and it's kind of like we're saying, so see, as I was telling you, in physics, they're not dealing with the elements so much. They're dealing with forces. And so they use the word water. Whereas here in chemistry, we're dealing with these compounds and formula, and so we use this code. Okay. So it's kind of like, so see, I told you, but then you don't just want to drop there. You don't want to end there. You want to go higher. You want to end on a more general level than where you began. Because you want to say not only, see, I told you, but also you want to end on saying, and here's why it's important. Here's why this idea at level 4, which I just proved to you, here's why it's important in the larger scope of the overall paper. And that larger scope is up here at the introduction. So here's this probably looks a little bit confusing, but generally, if you have 2 or 3 ideas, like this pattern, this uneven U pattern is a fractal. So it's true at every level of resolution. It's true at the paragraph level. It's true at the level of the whole essay. If you were writing a longer paper, such as a book, for example, it would be true for the section, it would be true for the paragraph, and it would be true for the whole book, right? This is the general organizing principle. So these level 5 sentences should link back up with your introduction. You say, here's an important point I'm going to prove to you. There, I just proved it to you. And here's why it's important to the overall message in this paper. Okay, now I'm going to show you in a moment how to write your introduction so that you know, but basically all of these level 5 sentences should be linking back up to the introduction and linking back up specifically to your thesis. So how do you get a thesis? How do you write an introduction? Here's the last part. This is the way that I teach introductions. It has 5 parts. And the purpose of teaching an introduction this way is that it positions your essay as being valuable. Okay, now we have to, think about this. But before we talk about academic papers, let's think about YouTube videos. Okay, YouTube videos. So if you watch a YouTube video, you'll notice that in the first 30 seconds of the video, you see all this crazy animation and all of the purpose of the first 30 seconds is to convince the viewer to not click away and not watch a different video. So that's why you see, these videos where they say, in this video, I'm going to show you this, I'm going to show you that, I'm going to show you that, a lot of editing. It gets you interested, right? And now think about this. And that's because in YouTube, they know that there is a lot of competition for your attention. And so they want to make you know that, hey, if you watch this video, I'm going to give you something really valuable. Okay. Now that's YouTube. And YouTube videos are pretty easy to watch. Now think about academic writing. Okay. Who's reading this? Okay, it's your teacher, but ultimately, if you want your writing to be valuable, you're not just writing to your teacher. You're writing to a community of other people who are in your field. These people are intelligent. They are very busy. They have their own research that they need to do. They have a lot of things that they could be doing with their time. They have Instagram, okay? So they could be looking at beautiful people on Instagram, but you want to tell them, hey, if you read this paper, I'm going to give you something better than your family or beautiful people on Instagram. I'm going to give you the solution to a problem. Here's a problem, reader. Here's the problem that you're having, and this paper is going to solve that problem for you. Okay? That is the purpose of an introduction. The introduction is the first 30 seconds of our YouTube video. And so here is a way that you can develop your introduction and position your idea as the solution to a problem. Okay? First, you've now developed these 3 claims, right? We talked about these 3 claims. You've already done that work. Okay, so you have your 3 claims. You want to develop a thesis over top of it that kind of brings the 3 claims together. So you want one sentence which is higher in the taxonomy than those 3 claims, whatever they might be. Okay, so that's your solution. That's your thesis. That is the sentence that you can underline that says, here's the point of this paper. And you should be able to do that. If you can't underline that sentence, if you can't show to me where is your thesis, what is the main point of this paper, then you don't have a paper. So your thesis is the umbrella statement that goes over top of your 3 claims. Good. Now we want the reader to think that that thesis is really important. And so here's the way to develop the introduction around that. Let's go up to the top, to the status quo. Status quo is Latin. It means the way that things are right now. And basically, we want the status quo to be the exact opposite of our thesis. If your thesis is X, then the status quo is not X. So for example, let's say our thesis is that academic writing, we were talking about personal pronouns. So it could be writers in my discipline can use personal pronouns in certain circumstances. Okay, that's part one. So the thesis might be like, in the field of chemistry, writers can use personal pronouns, use technical, H2O and that kind of thing. Whatever. The point is that you have your thesis. The status quo should be the opposite of that. So it should be, many people think that in academic writing, it's supposed to be impersonal. You're not supposed to use personal pronouns. It should be impersonal and objective. So whatever your thesis is, the status quo should be the exact opposite of that. Okay. Next part is called the concession. Now the concession is where you show what's good about the status quo, what's right or true about it, because we're going to be arguing against it. So you don't want to walk in and say, the status quo is completely trash. Those people they're so stupid. Here, I'm the right one. Okay. We want to be humble. So come in and think, why do those people think that? And what's true about the way that they think? You're going to say something like, of course, there's an important difference between everyday writing and academic writing. And certainly academic writing is more formal and in some cases more or less personal than familiar, writing, text messaging with your friends or something like that. Okay. Whatever. You say what's good about the status quo because you're about to fight with it. So you want to say what's good about it. So you'll say, of course, da, 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 da. But in the next part, the destabilizing condition is where you show what's wrong with the status quo. So you say, however, what those people failed to understand is whatever you think. You show what is the problem with the status quo. Now, finally, before we get to our solution to the problem, we need to show the consequence. What happens if we don't change the status quo? What bad thing will happen? Now, there are two, and this is called a problem. Now, there are two kinds of problems. There are practical problems and there are conceptual or idea problems. So a practical problem is a bad thing that will happen. It's like the status quo is this country is burning a lot of coal. Okay, coal for energy. Of course, coal is a cheap source of energy and it's important for developing nations. However, coal is also a major contributor to greenhouse gases. And if we don't stop burning coal, then air quality will continue to deteriorate. It will get bad and we'll have a lot of health problems. So the practical problem or the practical consequence shows what bad thing will happen if we don't change the status quo. Okay. Now, on the other hand, what you're probably dealing with in this paper is a conceptual problem. Now, a conceptual problem is one of ideas. So you want to say what bad thing will happen if people don't change their understanding. So for example, your idea is that in my field, they can use personal pronouns. Up here, many people think you cannot use personal pronouns and that academic writing should be impersonal. Conceptual. If people continue to think that academic writing should be totally impersonal and objective, then their work will not get published. It will not have an impact, or even like we will fail to understand an even more important part of academic writing. Like, that's the idea. You want to connect your idea to a bigger, more important idea. Something that if we don't understand this piece, then we will never understand that bigger problem. And so therefore, my solution is thesis. Whew. So that is it, guys. That is my guide to writing this writing in academic discipline paper. It's really just 4 steps, but it's important that you get them right, and it's important that you follow them carefully. I think it's a really worthwhile paper, and if you do it properly, then you can really learn something interesting that will help you in your academic and scientific career. So I hope you get a lot of value out of it, and I think if you follow this method, that is using gather your evidence using the rhetorical planning wheel, analyze and not summarize that evidence to generate claims. And remember, a claim is a point. It's something that somebody else can disagree with. Generate those claims and then organize your ideas using this fractal pattern, the uneven U. And then finally, position your work as the solution to a problem. And of course, your introduction, just going back, your introduction is level 4. So your conclusion, there's not like a solid guide as I have here for the introduction. There's not a solid guide for writing a conclusion, but still you should point outside the text and try to think, what are the bigger implications? What are the, if I'm right, if my thesis is right, then what else is also true? That's what your introduction should do. Or that's what your conclusion should do, I'm sorry. So if you follow those steps, then you are in good shape. Now, of course, it's always helpful to meet with a writing tutor. That might be me or it might be another professor. But before you do meet with that writing instructor, I hope you go through these steps because it would be so great to work with students who have gone through this process. I find whenever I'm meeting with students, we're always going over these same points. So hopefully this will take you to the next level. If you go through these points, then you're going to have an awesome paper, and whoever your writing tutor is, they're going to be really excited to work with you. So good luck on this assignment, and yeah, all the best.